So I was proposing that we standardize. I mean, I guess we're not hopefully going to be doing both processes simultaneously, but just for ease of administration, if nothing else, that we make the passing score for all four written, oral, new officers promotion 70%. What do you guys think? What feedback do you have on that?
That seems fine to me.
I don't have any problem with that.
That's generally what I've seen.
Okay.
I sort of like where Matt was going with the idea that if we were to make it a 70%, that we notify upfront that we will interview the top 12 initially, and then, or whatever that number is that you're comfortable with. Because my guess is that if, number one, I don't think you're going to get nearly as many candidates like most of the other testing that's being done.
Mm-hmm.
And you may well be interviewing everybody. I mean, assuming that they pass. But
Yeah.
You know, I see if you lower it, you're going to see more of a fluctuation between the high written test scores and the high overall, because I think there'll be a lot of flipping that occurs between the people score on the written test and the overall score because of the way we interview.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that too, limiting, like we'll interview the top 12. And I don't know, Falco, maybe we don't need to make that explicit. Maybe we do. I thought I saw that somewhere, but I'm looking through the ordinance now. Oh, here we go. Contenders. I found it. The board shall administer the oral examination to the highest 12 applicants. So this is section 205, who have attained the passing scores of, we would change it to 70% or, yeah, so it's already on there. We just have to change.
We just have to change a percentage.
Correct. Yep. Okay. So section 205 has to be edited as well as section, what were we just talking about? 208 to 70%. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about the percentages, which we started last meeting. So new officers currently is 60-40. Folks okay with that? Any suggestions for changes? Sorry, I should be clear. 60% written, 40% oral.
I'm okay with it.
Okay. Brian, good?
I prefer 50-50, but
Yeah.
there's other ways to emphasize the verbal.
Okay.
I wouldn't go the other direction. Let's put it that. I would lean more towards a 50-50. If we don't feel that we can get there, 60-40 is a good compromise. I wouldn't go a 70-30 or anything like that. In this environment, you know, I think it's important that we put as much weight as we can on the interviews.
Okay. So how do people feel about 50-50?
After going through one of these, I think that 50-50, 60-40, you're still, there's plenty of room there for discretion. So I'm fine with 50-50 as well.
Matt L, looks like you have something to say.
I know it does, doesn't it?
I'm glad we're not playing poker. I would lean to stay at the 60-40. I mean, it still comes down to, this is civil service. You know, the idea is that anybody can come in and take it and have a fair shot. I agree that the interview needs to be heavily weighted because, I mean, that's where we're really getting to know who the person is and how they're going to fit. So I wouldn't, traditionally, I've always seen 70-30. I think 60-40 is fair. I would be hesitant on the 50-50.
Okay. I'm not looking at the chat, so if Mark's chatting in, I can't see it. So someone tell me if Mark's
He had a
chatting
thumbs up earlier.
in. Okay.
Yeah, we don't have any chat messages.
Okay. I'm kind of in the same boat as Brian. I prefer 50-50, but I could live with 60-40. And Matt, I certainly respect your perspective being in the profession. So maybe we do 60-40 for both. Well, let's talk about one at a time. We're talking about new officers. So 60-40 sounds like there's general agreement for that. Thumbs up, thumbs
So
down.
leave it as is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine as is.
Okay. Well, we're on the graph that I have here, the percentages. Well, we're looking at the numbers we had talked about this last time. So I just want to close the loop and come to a decision since we're doing all the ordinance updates. For promotional, we had talked about either 60-40 or 50-50 on the last call. Where are people landing after having thought about that more? Right now it's 70-30.
I think just to throw my 2 cents in, a 60-40 would be fair. I think if it's taken down to a 50-50, then you start to eliminate the potential reward for the officer that really studies all the material they're given. I mean, these guys are given stuff to study and go over and pore over to prepare for this test. And if they take the time and really focus on that, there should be, a reward on the other side of that.
Okay, anyone else?
I think keeping it consistent across the board, 60-40 would probably be good so that people don't get confused. It's like, oh yeah, this is the promotion exam. I got a 70-30 split, or this is the new hire. I'm 60-40.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing about the verbal and the perspective of fairness and rewards, I understand. And one of the things that I come back to is, how do we make the perception of the verbal to be rewarding and fair? And is there a way to do that? And I understand that's not where we are right now. And I'm wondering, aside from whether it's possible, how it might be possible. And the thing I keep coming back to in that line of thought is the possibility of doing these descriptions of the roles and descriptions of and articulating them to everyone, and having the some significant portion, potentially even all the questions relating to situations that have come up that give people a chance to demonstrate those roles that they're either performing or that they're aspiring to in a higher level. And then it basically is clear what both the goals and performance on a day-to-day basis are, and what will be discussed in those verbal interviews. That's a different approach, but it also, I think, gets us more towards behavior-based sort of goals and behavior-based frameworks that I think can help overall. And that might, so I'm curious if that's a potential way, Matt, to help that fairness and well, I guess it was Matt Shipley's idea that came up either last month or the month before, and just kind of rehashing it and potentially inserting it in a way to make this make more sense.
Yeah, and we did absolutely use behavioral interviewing questions, and we based those on the job descriptions that we had gotten from Chief Hawk. However, where I think maybe there's some room for improvement next time is communicating the categories and what we were looking for to the candidates. So saying to them, hey, we're going to be asking questions in these 5 areas, be prepared for that. I think that in the past, it had been very more generic questions. They weren't expecting the tell me about a time when sort of behavioral interviewing questions. So I think they were surprised that it was more in depth than they had experienced in the past. But I can't speak to the questions that were used previously for new officers, but for the sergeant exam, we definitely did do behavioral based. And I think you're right on point, Brian. That's the way to go.
And you folks will have to forgive me. I need to jump off to head to another meeting. Any questions or anything you need from me before I do?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me look at the agenda. Hold on. What else? Well, being that Chief Hawk is not on, any other community updates for us, Bob?
I know.
I
that
have a
Nick went
little
over
report
those,
from
but
Chief on that.
Yeah,
So I can share that when the time comes, or I can just share it now if you want.
no, it's fine.
Anything else, Bob, that you want to tell us or want us to make sure to discuss?
No, I think we're moving in the right direction.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Bob. Take care. I think Mark said he had to go at 10 as well for a meeting.
I'm
Well,
gonna jump off now.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, to get back to what Brian said and to clarify what I said before, it's not just about putting out some kind of guidance right before the exam. What I'm saying is that we should go through and define what is the ideal officer as far as characteristics, and then publish that so that new candidates and everybody throughout the police force can be gearing their daily actions based upon those things, to what we're expecting from them, so that when they come into an interview, there's no surprises. This is what we're looking for, and they can give examples to demonstrate it. They'll know to talk to those issues, but be able to demonstrate through past experiences or actions within the time that they were on the police force here in McCandless will be what will determine their promotional status. And I think that would be more fair than anything else that we have so far.
I think if we're looking for the description or bullet points for the ideal officer, that would be something the chief would need to put together for us. I don't think that's something we would sit down and put together.
Yeah,
And
we're
that's
not.
fine.
Yeah, we're not. We're not saying we define the ideal officer. We're talking about the process.
And I think there's more discussion to be had on the process of selection. Brian, you had sent some recommendations over, but does it make sense?
I wouldn't. There's no pride in authorship there, so that's more just trying to push the ball forward, whether it's helpful or whether we go with something different or not. I just wanted to, help the discussion to make something concrete, basically. Sorry.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. What I was going to say is maybe we don't decide yet on the percentage breakdown for promotion until we come to some agreement about how to adjust that process in the future. Sorry, I'm like trying to write and talk at the same time.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, it is a kind of a broader strategic discussion for, because make it a point where the officer's like, well, yeah, I want to be able to talk about that and get more points for that. Then, and I definitely want to pass the exam and be, acceptable on the exam. But I'm an officer. I'm not a first and foremost somebody who, agonizes over the arcana of whatever the test is about. And I do that on a day-to-day basis, as an officer. I don't know, sorry, speaking as an officer, not as me. But we'll see. I mean, I think it's hard to have this conversation without the chief on.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, Nick, can you pull up? Let's go there now, since we're talking about it. Can you pull up what Brian sent so we can look at that?
Absolutely, yes. Let me get that.
I've got too many windows open here to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as
Yeah,
another
this new
sideline,
ranking process draft 01 file I have up, and I will share.
and there's a question for Falco implicit in this, which is that having two different parallel processes, which is the way this is structured, it's basically, hey, there's this consensus-based approach that considers everything and ranks the people, and that's that if there's a possibility of consensus. And if somebody says, hey, I don't think we're gonna be able to generate a consensus, let's just go with the calculation, it bounces into the traditional calculation-based ranking. And one concern is that begs, grievances and sort of, disputes if it is the more consensus-based approach, even though I think that's what the board would prefer. So Falco, do you have a feeling for that? Is it bad to have a kind of a 2-track process? Falco, you're on mute.
Sure, Falco can. I just requested that he unmute.
He might not be available. That's fine. But again, that was kind of the idea, at least.
Hey, Brian, the as far as reaching a consensus,
I'm sorry.
go ahead, Falco.
I'm sorry. I started to talk and I thought I was unmuted. I apologize. I don't think it's necessarily bad to have 2 different tracks or processes. I think the question is, again, if we're talking about the ordinance itself, how much of that needs to be spelled out directly in the ordinance, and how much can be through an administrative regulation or procedure that the board itself operates under. And I think that the question then becomes, to what degree, let's say that there's the more detailed structure is spelled out in an administrative regulation, should there be then some general reference in the ordinance to that, so that the officer knows, okay, there's guidance or direction, or information on what the board is going to be looking for in the interview that I can access or obtain once that process begins. So I guess that, to me, that's the tension, is how much detail should be in the ordinance compared to what should be in an administrative regulation.
Yeah, and so the motivation of trying to edit the ordinance, or at least provide the option of having something that was going to generate a different recommendation, was that if this consensus-based process did generate the different top 3 than the strict calculations would, then that almost guarantees a dispute or a grievance that would be difficult to defend. Right.
I feel that it would be appropriate to have a discussion about including in the ordinance the general categories of what you're going to be looking for when you conduct the oral interview, so that the officers, like you said, are aware of that as they conduct their daily duties as police officers. Then the detail of how you're going to weigh or analyze that as a board should be something more in an internal procedural document, as opposed to actually in the ordinance itself. That would be, to me, the comparison between the 2.
Okay, I see. So you're saying basically just take all this stuff out of the ordinance and make it make the ordinance just a reference to, maybe some general, well, it'll reference some general principles of, what we're going to be asking about, and that there's going to be a written exam, and then the administration of the details of that are in a separate document. Is that correct?
Right. And part of the reason for that, again, is as you continue forward, that procedure of what you do internally as a board during the examinations could go through changes, and you don't always want to have to go back into an ordinance to fine tune each time you do the examination. So, but the ordinance kind of viewed more as the skeleton, so to speak, of the process, giving enough notice, public notice to the officers, but then the internal process would be governed by the regulation.
Okay.
So you're suggesting,
Now, if
Falco,
somebody
that
puts in I'm sorry.
no, I was just going to say, so the first part of your comment was to include the general categories, which are not in there now, to say we're looking for good communication skills and integrity and, all the categories, essentially.
Right, that gives the notice to the officer even between examinations because, you know, they have their eye on possible promotions, so they know how they should be conducting themselves or what they should be doing. Once an examination is posted and you have an interested pool of applicants, then there may be another informational document that's shared with them. Okay, you know, going into the interview, you know, these are the general ideas of what we're going to be asking, again, like somebody had said, so that they can gather their thoughts or prepare themselves for the actual examination. Again, I don't know that I would put that in the ordinance because it puts you in a position where you're constantly reviewing and updating and amending an ordinance because of the detail that might be involved. I've always approached ordinances as being, again, more the framework and the generalized information, and then flesh that out through regulations and procedures that are adopted.
Okay, yeah, that seems reasonable.
Okay. The only comment I had on what you were suggesting, Brian, is that the interview process doesn't always include the 3 personnel board members. It can be like 2 members and an alternate, or it doesn't even have to be 3 people. It could be 2 people. So that was the only nitpicky thing I had on the
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
suggestions.
Okay, so it would be sort of designated participants from the personnel board or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. So we don't have this, what was Falco calling it, a regulatory administrative document or something?
Yeah, an administrative regulation. I don't believe that the board does. I think kind of informally you did that in the last process, but nothing, you know, that you referred to or had in your hand. You know, I think, again, because board compositions could change, you know, moving forward, that if you have such a document, then that benefits future members of the board coming in. Okay, this is what we operate under, and maybe they have ideas of changing it or revising it or, you know, updating it, you know, depending on what the circumstances are. But that would be what you would operate under, you know, as you conduct the evaluations. Now, keep in mind, like we're going through right now, that potentially there could be right to know requests wanting to know, well, what was that process? A document like that definitely would be subject to a right to know request because all it's doing is creating that framework and procedure that you then operate under.
Okay, so that's helpful. So we can maybe work on the specifics of the administrative regulation in a future meeting. But for now, I have that we decided 70% passing score for written and oral for both new and promotional process, new officers and promotions, and 60-40 overall weightings for new officers. Given what we just talked about for the promotional process, does that influence, or what do people think about the 60-40 for promotions, or 50-50 was the other idea on the table? Just so I'm trying to get the ordinance kind of buttoned up so we can then go on to like, okay, what's the process for the new hires, which hopefully after council interviews for the promotions, they can then move to request the new officers. I think that's what Bob said last time would be happening from a sequencing perspective.
I think like Matt had said, the 60-40 would be consistent through the hire and promotion, and that makes sense. I would agree with that.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, I'm okay with that. I did kind of prefer 50-50, but we'll we'll make small changes now and see how that works. Okay. So, well, okay, so Nick, if you would scroll down here, again, I don't know that we need to necessarily document this, but we'll have to come back to the process of those 12, if there's 12 people that have reached the 70%, which is the new threshold for the new officer selection, how the interviewers would be coming to an agreement, because that's more important than that process and the determination of that process, and perhaps even the documentation of that process is more important than we realized. So, I mean,
Hey,
obviously,
this is
yeah.
the second time Falco has told us what he just said, and I highly recommend that we take Brian's suggestions here and put them in that internal document, and then put forward the internal document, and we can review it the next time.
Yeah.
So that we don't hamstring ourselves in this this ordinance.
Agreed.
Because these are things that, you know, that need to be flexible, and we don't want to be changing them going through the council every time. So, you know, let's leave the framework, unless there's something specific in the framework that needs to be changed to make more general or whatever. I say we don't mess with or you know, more clearly define or down to that level of detail in the ordinance.
Yep. No, I'm in agreement with you. I'm just saying whoever's doing the interviewing will have to be clear on how we're doing that. We don't have to put it in the ordinance, but we have to decide in advance how that will be done for the new officer selection when we get to that point.
Right, yeah, and I, you know, given what we did last time, I think it worked really well as far as gaining consensus without a lot of, you know, well, we gained a consensus very easily. There wasn't a lot of pushback or anything else. It was like, okay, this is what everybody decided, type of thing. So
Yeah.
we could more formalize that in our own personal document that outlines that process.
Yep. Okay, perfect. So let's
Then do
not,
we just have Falco draft an ordinance language that reflects that?
oh, I think that'd be hard for Falco to do. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, referring to the, excuse me, to the internal document, I think it does make sense for the board to fashion that initial draft, and then I can weigh in, you know, from my end once that draft is prepared.
No, I meant for the ordinance, the framework doc.
Oh.
Because then you have to
I'm sorry.
reference, then you have to reference the administrative, what do you call it? Administrative regulation
Yeah,
for personnel board in the ordinance, and that's what the ordinance changes to. That's what I was asking for.
I see.
yes, there should be some tie-in between the two documents. So there should be those references. I think the other thing that I was hearing this morning is those general categories of what's going to be asked during the interviews. Those are things that would then be put into the ordinance. And then the changes in the weighting and the percentages, again, from our discussions this morning, those, am I understanding from the discussion that that's what the board wants to make the changes for the ordinance?
That's my understanding, looking at body language and thumbs up and.
Well,
one
we also
protesting.
should also have Chief Hawk is the one who gives us those categories, and also gives us the ideal candidate for each one of those categories.
Yeah, so we have some of the categories from how we structured the interview document. I can connect with Chief Hawk on those and see if he thinks we should add or modify or whatever. And then
whether there are changes between the oral interview for the initial hire as opposed to the promotional hire. Are there
right,
different things that are being looked for as well?
right. Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to capture this all, because if I don't write it down, it doesn't happen. Okay, so I'll take that as an action item.
Then once you provide that information to me, Amy, then I'll fashion the changes in red line to the ordinance, working from, I guess, the previous draft that we had, and have that ready before our next meeting.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so we already made some changes to the eligibility requirements. That's what Nick is referencing here, the 13705. We made changes today to some of the weightings as well as the threshold, and a few other small changes to the framework as we just discussed.
Okay.
Okay, and then at some point we need to dive into, we talked before, oh, sorry, before we leave that topic, I did want to ask, I guess, oh, did we lose? No, Matt's still there. So Matt, I guess I'm going to put you on in the hot seat again, since Chief's not here. The veterans preference points, is that a state requirement? Is that something that everyone does? Is that something we should even talk about?
It's a civil service requirement. Everybody does do it. It's 10 points that's added at the end of after the written and the oral interviews are done and totaled up. Then if somebody has veterans preference, that 10 points gets added on at that point. So
Okay.
you technically could have somebody that scores over 100 with a further total final score.
I thought,
But that's only for the new hires, right? That's not for promotion.
right.
Correct. Yeah. And they have to submit their paperwork in order to be eligible for the veterans preference.
Yeah. I remember Chief Tasani saying something to that, like that wasn't negotiable essentially, but I couldn't remember the details. So, okay. Not that I would want to change it. I just, for everyone's edification.
And so how does that change? So we have to still go with the points-based prioritization ranking system for new hires then, and not necessarily consensus-based? Is that kind of one of the upshots of that?
Yeah, I mean, the way veterans preference is written is after you have a final total score, 10 points gets added as the veterans preference. So that gives you a push on the final score and where you're going to land on the list. And then if you're a veteran and you're in the top 3, then you get preference and you get picked. I believe I'm quoting that correctly, Nick.
So yes, Brian, to your point, that's true. We can't just come up with here's our consensus of the top 3. We do have to have some kind of scoring mechanism for the new officers. Now we can come to consensus and, we had talked about like top person gets 90 or next person gets 85. I know we've had different conversations, how we come to a consensus or how we score them, rather. We can decide in that other document, but the idea of scoring cannot, like, we can't not give them a numerical number because of this veterans preference. Not that anyone was suggesting that, but
Okay.
yeah. I was gonna look something up and now I forgot what. Okay, so I see that we have 8 minutes left. So let me go back to the agenda. Sorry. Nick, you said you had updates on Citizens Police Academy completion and other community engagement updates.
Yeah, I have some notes and a little statement here from Chief Hawk. He first wanted to say that the Citizens Police Academy had its final class back on November 4th and concluded with SIMPAC training and some other things that happened during that class. All the participants for the Police Academy were recognized by Town Council at their last meeting back on Monday, November 8th. He said that they definitely have plans to offer the Academy again next year, given its popularity and its success. Police Department is also participating in No Shave November. So we have some officers right now, including Chief Hawk himself, that are growing some facial hair, with the proceeds from that benefiting a family here in the town. They're also collecting for.
Wait, I'm sorry, I have to stop you. So how does that translate to money? I get No Shave November.
Thinking the same thing.
That's a good question. That's a good question. I'm not sure if there's some kind of a fundraiser at the end or just, how exactly that translates into that. I should have asked for some more details on that.
It's November, and I think they get sponsors, and so that just like when you say you're going to walk so many miles, you're sponsored 10 cents a mile or whatever. Who knows
Yeah,
how they sponsor it, but that's probably how it's done.
Yeah, they have some sort of a sponsorship or fundraising mechanism built into that, I'm sure. They're also collecting for North Hills Community Outreach for folks in need during the holiday season here, collecting things like toys, toiletries, diapers, etc. So that's all. That's some things that are going on kind of the more community engagement end of things. If anyone has any questions about that, other than No Shave November, I'll relay that to Chief Hawk.
Okay. I don't know if you guys are on social media, but I've noticed the McCandless Police Force has been doing a good job with updates to Facebook in particular. I think there's what's the other app called, Nick? The one
Instagram?
No, the one sponsored by the town with all the town events.
There's Savvy Citizen and
Savvy
McCandless
Citizen.
and Me.
Savvy Citizen. That's the one I was thinking of. So I don't get push updates from that. But if you're not connected with the police force and the town on social media, and you're on social media, that's something to consider. I'm not on Instagram. Do they do updates there as well?
I know the town does. I'm not sure about the police department.
Okay.
I can ask John Bajarski about that. And get back.
Yeah, I was just curious. Okay, any other community engagement updates or questions? No? Looked like you had something to share, Brian, something else, or?
Yeah, there's one other thing that I wanted to bring up, and it's in the spirit of when we look at these things at a little higher level of detail, some things pop out and I'm just like, what? There's in the thing that you sent out by email, Amy, that I noticed there was a sentence that said, in the event any test is approved to determine if unacceptable levels of alcohol are or have been consumed, or whether any controlled substance are or have been ingested, the applicant shall be notified prior to the test. And I definitely understood that from an alcohol and even marijuana perspective, because now that's medical. But any controlled substances are or have been ingested was a surprising thing for me to read in the permissible sort of like notification requirements prior to a test. And I was wondering if I could get a little more context on that and history and status.
Okay, so this is section 209, conditional officers of employment. We were looking at this. Let me give some of the background first. So you may have seen in the email that the Allegheny Police School, I don't know what they're called, Academy, thank you, is only administering the Cooper test for the physical agility part of that, which is fine. That's what we'll use. We don't specify in the ordinance which test we use. We had talked previously about using that test, so that's what it will be. So section 209 says any person from the list of eligibles who has been given and accepted a conditional offer of employment shall be given physical, medical, and psychological evaluations, blah, blah, blah. The personnel board shall determine which psychological, physical, and medical tests are to be administered and who shall administer them in conformance with applicable law or regulations. So that's where we have had some conversations in the past about, oh my gosh, my brain is just not working today. What's the lie detector test called?
Polygraph.
Thank you. It's like I can't even think of the game show that it's like, but must need more coffee. So then it goes on to say the successful completion of the test administered shall be a condition precedent to employment with the town. Last sentence, which Brian read. In the event any test is approved to determine if unacceptable levels of alcohol are or have been consumed, or whether any controlled substances are or have been ingested, the applicant shall be notified prior to the test. So I read that as like, if there was something that flagged from the physical or medical test as an issue, that it would be that we would inform the candidate. Is that how others are reading it? Or Falco, maybe you have more insight into that last sentence.
Yeah, I'm not, I don't have access to a screen, so if it's on the screen, I can't see it.
It's not. It was in an email that I sent out, which
Okay.
now I realize I didn't include you, Falco. I'm sorry. I should have put you on that email.
Well, it's just in the ordinance. It's not, it is in the existing ordinance. So there's, that was the other thing of, you know, like just understanding what's in there currently. And, you know, from a worrisome perspective, the potential interpretation of that is you get a warning, you know, so you can get your, you know, you know, get yourself clean to pass the test. And it just introduces the worrisome possibility of people being able to get through who have really serious substance issues with really serious substances, not just, you know, alcohol and marijuana, basically. That was the words, any controlled substances, were the things that I really was like, whoa.
Yeah, I think the intent of that is that if I had some kind of procedure and I have prescribed Vicodin, that I would be told, okay, we're going to be testing, you know, so that you can say, well, wait a second, here's my prescription, you know, I'm taking Vicodin right now, it's going to show up in my system, as opposed to somebody who may be illegally taking that substance. It's a controlled substance. It's not an illegal substance, so to speak. You know, necessarily, you may have a prescription for it that can explain why its presence may be in your system. That's, I believe, the intent of that.
Okay, I mean, I
So-
guess taking a different perspective on it, is there random drug testing for illegal drugs that's kind of generally notified of the current police force? Because that's a huge deterrent. I mean, it's just like just knowing there might be testing, I think is enough of a deterrent that people either self-select out, or they, you know, they stay off it, or they never have, you know, ideally.
I don't believe we do random testing of current police officers. This is obviously for new officers. I think we had asked that question in the past. But as long as from a legal perspective, there's no, it is kind of a strange sentence, I agree, but I think we're just saying, hey, you're gonna have a drug test as part of this. And you know, if you're on some kind of controlled substance and you have a prescription for it, you need to notify us.
Right. That's
Yeah.
my interpretation of that.
Understand.
Okay. Okay, so sorry, I see we're slightly over. Apologies for that. So I have an action item to get with Chief Hawk on the categories of the ideal officer that we'd be looking for, and potentially add that to the ordinance. We're also going to redline the ordinance for some of the changing and weighting and passing percentages that we talked about. We did not get to the item that I had put in the email about potentially sponsoring people for the academy, sending them through the academy, and what that might look like. So we can put that on the agenda for next month. And hopefully we will have the review of the new ordinance for next month to look at. Anything else?
Ryan, did you want to take another crack at making that, taking, not another crack, but taking what you've done, the great work you've done so far, and putting it into as a draft internal document for our selection? And then we could discuss it next time.
Sure. So let's have placeholders, I guess, for the parts that we need Chief Hawk's feedback on as far as the behaviors.
Correct.
And it also sounds like the consensus-based approach can't be used for the new hires.
Well,
So
it
it's
could
just-
if it,
Go ahead.
sorry to interrupt, it could
That's
if it
fine.
results in a score.
Okay. All right. I can take a crack at that then too. So yeah.
And I'd be happy to work with you on that, Brian, having gone through it once, and sort of, if you want. Happy to
Okay.
help.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we can bounce it back and forth. That sounds great.
Okay, our next meeting is, sorry, I'm looking at my calendar here. So we're November, what is it, December 15th? Is that right,
15th,
Nick?
yeah.
15th, okay. So
9:30.
save the date, December 15th. You know, Falco, I'm sorry, before we sign off here, does that internal document need to be discussed in a public recorded forum? I mean, it seems to me like that might be something that would be more of a personnel matter. I'm not sure we want the entire police force to know all the ins and outs. Well, maybe we do. I don't know. I guess.
Yeah, we're not talking about a specific officer. And as I mentioned before, it still would be a document that would be subject to right to know.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm inclined to
So,
think
yeah, it would
transparency is
still-
our friend.
Yeah, no, I'm all for
Right.
transparency too, but I know
Yeah.
there's been some things I brought up in these meetings. They say, oh, no, wait, we're going to do that in a different forum. So, but I guess that's,
Sure.
I see your point. That's pertaining to a specific person that we're not to discuss publicly. So, okay.
Right.
All right. Anything else? All right, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.